China is known for its rich cultural heritage and instantly recognizable architectural style, but in recent decades the temptation to develop modern buildings, as well as both to appeal to tourists and provide citizens with views of the rest of the world without having to leave their own country. A number of suspiciously familiar structures have been built in China. Things had started to get so ridiculous that the government has recently issued a decree banning this so-called duplitecture. From entire towns developed to look like somewhere else to individual monuments that are virtual clones, these are 15 weird Chinese replica copycat buildings. Number 15. Tianduchan, Hangzhou, Zhejiang Province. Also known as the Sky City, Tianduchan is a housing development that can be found on the outskirts of the city of Hangzhou in the Funchang province. Building works began on a green site in 2007, and while it wasn't wildly popular to begin with, it has since been expanded several times and is now home to more than 30,000 people. The problem is, when you're there, you hardly have any idea that you were in China if it wasn't for the writing on the signs and the street markers. That's because at the very center is a 354-foot-tall exact replica of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And while that isn't too unusual, after all there are at least 10 replicas of the tower in the US alone, this is just the beginning of the similarities with the French city. In fact, the core 12 square miles of the city features Parisian architecture, from the style of the buildings to the aesthetic and arrangement of the fountains and the landscaping. Some of the vistas have been designed to look exactly like they do in Paris, particularly the surrounding views of the Eiffel Tower. But if you travel around the city, you'll also find a recreation of one of Paris's most famous roads, the Champs-Élysées, and even a version of the Statue of Liberty, modeled after the first version of the monument that can be seen in Paris along the banks of the River Seine. Number 14. AntiGermantown Shanghai. There's something romantic and fairy tale-like about traditional German architecture, and this is exactly what Chinese authorities wanted to recreate when they commissioned a German design company to build AntiGermantown on the outskirts of Shanghai. Something seems to have been lost in translation, however, because what they finally got was a recreation of a modern German residential development, just like you'd find all around redeveloped areas of Berlin or Stuttgart. Complete with tall, functional Bauhaus-style tower blocks painted orange and lime green, it was designed by a German firm that's owned by the son of Hitler's chief architect during the Second World War. Unsurprisingly, after being completed in the mid-2000s, despite featuring statues and inscriptions with the writings of famous German philosophers and authors, AntiGermantown hardly excited any prospective Chinese residents. Virtually no one decided to move in, even though it's conveniently located near an automotive factory and Shanghai's Formula One racetrack. And things were so underwhelming that they were even forced to cancel the first Oktoberfest and haven't been able to hold the festival since. Number 13. Yujiapu Financial District, Tianjin. Huge development is taking place across China to boost the economy and bring investment from all over the world. And one of the focal points of this strategy is the Yujiapu Financial District in the Binhai-Nu area of the city of Tianjin. Hoped to become a world center for world trade and finance, it covers a 1.4 square mile area next to the Hai River and is around 93 miles away from Beijing. After a long construction process, tenants finally began to start moving in 2016, and it was around this time that observers around the world began to notice that the financial district looked strangely familiar. It seems that the designers, when choosing how best to create a metro area suited to hosting a financial hub, decided to look at somewhere that's already successfully filling that role, copying the main features. This becomes clearest when it's seen from across the river, as there's absolutely no doubt that the district has been modeled on Manhattan. The skyline has a distinct New York feel to it, and this is exactly what the investors behind the project wanted. How better to convince people from around the world to move to a new area than making it exactly like they're used to where they currently work. Number 12. Dalian, Little Venice. Dalian is a port city in the Liaoning province in northeast China. Originally settled in 1899, although in a region with a rich history that stretches further back than that, it has a population of around 7 million people. With so many residents, it, like any other city, has a huge number of entertainment venues, such as theme parks and stadia. But the most unusual district was built in 2011 and is supposedly a recreation of Venice in Italy. Authorities chose a group of French architects to redevelop the space with a budget of $725 million, and the result was a version of Venice that looks like it was ordered on Wish.com. With 2.5 miles of canals that are lined by more than 200 European-style buildings, there are faked replicas of Renaissance-era paintings and decorations, and you can even take a ride along a canal in a gondola, with a gondolier dressed in the traditional Venetian attire. Apart from the strange sensation of seeing skyscrapers from elsewhere in Dalian rising above the modest Venetian buildings, the one thing about Venice that the designers have failed to recreate is the business of the Italian city. While this replica was originally received well by the Chinese, the desire for there to be more homegrown architecture as well as some of the less convincing aspects of this site means that there are very few visitors, and it almost feels like a ghost town during most of the year. Number 11. Thamestown, Shanghai. Around 19 miles from the center of Shanghai, you'll find a newly built community in the Funchang district that's called Thamestown. Named after the river that runs through London in England, it wasn't just the town's moniker that was inspired by the capital city of the UK, but its architecture too. This is the Chinese replica of England, and rather than reproducing elements of London, is actually a combination of various styles found across the country from different time periods. There are cobbled streets, various Victorian terraces, corner shops, and red telephone boxes, as well as a selection of restaurants offering English cuisine and shops selling British products. The idea was that it would be used to provide accommodation for several nearby universities and businesses. But just like if you were trying to live near the real River Thames, property prices in Thamestown were prohibitively expensive. This was seen as the main reason why very few people moved in once it was complete in the mid-2000s, along with people seeing it as a novelty village rather than a serious place to live. And after repeated attempts to revitalize Thamestown, most of the restaurants and facilities had closed by 2016. Now it's a ghost town and has simply been left to fall into a state of disrepair, which makes it all the more surprising that a few years ago, a project was announced to build another English town near Beijing. Number 10. Holland Village, Guangzhou, Shanghai. Guangzhou, which is a town in Shanghai, has a long, varied history, having originally been settled in the southern Song dynasty more than 1,000 years ago. Once full of traditional architecture, locals were horrified to learn that as part of China's one city, 9 towns policy, it had been chosen to be redeveloped into a replica of a village from the Netherlands. Known as Holland Village and designed by a team of Dutch architects, it covers an area of 1/3 of a square mile, standing in stark contrast to the industrialized surroundings of chemical factories and manufacturing plants. At the center of the village is a large replica windmill, along with a series of canals and precise recreation of the Netherlands Maritime Museum, the Bijenkorf department store from Amsterdam, and the Hofvik Mansion from Voorburg. As with the other towns like this, the plan was that the original development would be an attractive proposition for new residents, and that as it gained popularity, it would be expanded even further. This never happened though, and rather than being a bustling canal front community, it's instead a ghost town, where the only people you're likely to see are the occasional security guards tasked with protecting the buildings. Number 9. Holstadt Huizhou. The small town of Holstadt in Austria is a stunning lakeside community that was built against a mountain range and supported the local salt mining industry as far back as 2,500 years ago, and has now been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's visited by tens of thousands of people per day during peak periods. It makes sense then that authorities in China looked at the town with envy and decided that rather having to queue up with everyone else to see Holstadt for themselves, they'd instead create their own replica. Imaginatively called Holstadt, it's located in Bolo County in the city of Huizhou, Guangdong, and features a number of exact copies of buildings from the town center of the original Holstadt, including the parish church, the fountain, and plenty more. Despite skepticism by the residents of Holstadt in Austria, the town's mayor actually attended the opening ceremony in Holstadt in China, with the hope that it would increase tourism to his own town. Since opening, Holstadt, China has actually become somewhat of a success and regularly exceeds expectations with the number of visitors it attracts. Number 8. Raffles City, Chongqing. Raffles City is the name given to a series of 8 buildings in the Yuzhong district of Chongqing, which began being built in 2013. At first, during construction, no one in the outside world thought there was anything too unusual about what was happening, partly because the completed designs hadn't been made public. But by the time the main towers had been finished and workers began to attach an almost 1,000-foot-long sky bridge called the Crystal on top of the 4 skyscrapers, it started to seem as if it wasn't the first time a structure like this had been built. People immediately began to draw comparisons with the Marina Bay Sands Hotel in Singapore, and for good reason. It was the exact same design company behind the new development in China. Admittedly, there were a few differences, such as the fact that the Sky Park in Singapore is open-topped, while the one in Raffles City is completely covered. But the overall similarities are undeniable. Not only do they look alike from a distance, but the use of the tower-top platforms is too similar. The one in China will feature an infinity swimming pool just like in Singapore, along with various other entertainment venues. Maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that architects use similar techniques and methods in their designs with each building. But this one surely is so similar that it must have been a conscious decision that was made. Number 7. Spanish Town, Funchang. With a series of mock windmills, white stone buildings with creamy yellow walls and red tiles, and various quixotic structures, you'd be forgiven for thinking you were looking at scenes from rural Spain. But in fact, this is the town of Funchang, which is on the outskirts of Shanghai. Another development as part of China's One City, Nine Towns project. The idea was to create a tranquil Andalusian village that acts as a destination for visitors, as well as a new community to serve the nearby businesses. Covering an area of 3/4 of a square mile, the main street called Lanbo Road has a Spanish museum and is where all of the local government buildings were moved to. As with the other towns created as a part of the plan, however, this Spanish town never exactly proved to be the inspiring place that it was hoped, and very few people moved in. Partly because of the poor transport links. It takes 3 hours to reach central Shanghai on public transport. Along with the lack of local amenities, the town today has almost reverted back to being more like a typical Chinese suburb. While the noticeably Spanish-inspired buildings are still there, most residents have no idea that it was once part of a project to bring worldwide influences to China. And rather than selling international goods and produce, the local stores are now full of the same products you'll find everywhere else in Shanghai. Number 6. Shakespeare Town, Sanweng, Fuzhou City. He's gone down in history as being one of the most revered and influential playwrights in the English language, so it's perhaps no surprise that Chinese authorities decided in 2018 to begin constructing a town dedicated to William Shakespeare in the Sanweng district of Fuzhou City. As was common with the developments inspired by other countries, investors turned to designers from England to plan how the town would look. But surprisingly, part of the team developing it was the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, which is the organization responsible for preserving and protecting his former homes in the UK. But providing the structural drawings for where the bard was born, the town features a Stratford-upon-Avon quarter, where every building will feature the Tudor-style design of the actual market town in England. The idea behind the concept is that there are millions of people who aren't able to visit the actual Stratford to learn about Shakespeare, and that this new development will help give many more people access to his works. The name Sanweng means 3 masters, and as well as Shakespeare, there are eras dedicated to Cervantes and Tang Shanzu, a playwright from that region of China. With plans to build a theater park as well as a number of other performance venues, it's hoped Sanweng will become a cultural hub that attracts visitors from around the world. Number 5. Florentia Village, Wuqing, Tianjin. With inner-city spaces becoming increasingly congested and crowded, outlet villages have become increasingly common in China as a way to tempt consumers away, so the central business districts can focus more on jobs and the economy. By hosting a large number of desirable brands in one place, these villages become a destination in their own right for those looking for a day of retail therapy. But with so many buildings being built, each one has to find its own way to stand out. While China might already have its own full replica of Venice and Dalian, it seems one version of the romantic Italian city isn't enough, because there's another in Tianjin that's been built solely to be used as a retail village. Known as Florentia Village, it covers an area of 2 million square feet and offers a themed shopping experience across 4 sectors: luxury, internationally famous products, sports, and outdoor and leisure products. There are almost 200 top Italian brands and international and domestic fashion brands represented there, with all the stores housed in buildings reminiscent of the 16th century Italian style, with artistic roof tiles, street furniture, and a canal network that passes through. Number 4. Lodian Newtown, The small harbor town of Sigtuna in Sweden was first founded in the year 980 and currently has a population of around 9,000 people. With a distinct medieval vibe to the architecture, it's full of restaurants, cafes, and stores, along with plenty of ruins and ancient monuments that are popular with tourists in the summer months. It isn't, however, exactly the most visited or exciting place in Sweden, which makes it all the more mysterious to why developers in China decided to recreate it in Lodian, which is around 16 miles from central Shanghai. Designed by a Swedish architectural firm, the center of Lodian Newtown is a man-made lake that was based on Sweden's Lake Mälaren and was then surrounded by imitation buildings. It certainly feels at first like a quaint Scandinavian town, but while the original plan was to eventually cover 2.6 square miles, there was a significant lack of interest, and the town remains unfinished. Surprisingly though, one feature that was completed was the golf club that hosts the BMW Masters, and it even included on the PGA European Tour in 2011 when it was called the Lake Mälaren Shanghai Masters. Number 3. Hometown, USA, Hebei. Sandwiched between two mountain ranges and on the border between the Hebei province and Beijing, Hometown, USA is a resort town that was specifically designed to capture the sense of Americana and offer it to Chinese citizens. Authorities knew they wanted an American-inspired town, so hired an interior designer to research potential towns that could be the inspiration. She visited Martha's Vineyard and Vail in Colorado, but it was the images she took of Jackson Hole in Wyoming that really excited the backers of the project. They moved forwards, therefore, with plans from an architect in Wyoming to create the 1,000-home community, which was decorated with cliched decorations like cowhide, antler chandeliers, wagon wheels, horseshoes, and plenty more that were shipped to China from the U.S. Controversially, the developer also put a Christian church at the center of the site, saying that rather than purely being about the architecture, clients wanted freedom and spirituality. And according to reports, he was right. Property prices have supposedly more than tripled since it was first opened, and there are now plans to create another slice of Americana within the same Chinese mountains. Number 2. Cube Tube, Jinhua. Opened in 2010, the Cube Tube is an office and restaurant building that was designed by Sako Architects and built in the new economic zone in Jinhua, in the Zhejiang province. Offering a floor space of 144,000 square feet, the town planners wanted a striking building to act as a landmark in the area. With 9 floors, the structure has had various cross-cutting corridors that connect the terraces on each side, and the inside was specifically designed to feel airy and light. Aluminum panels were attached to the exterior to give it its noticeable box-like shape and design aesthetic, and when it was completed, it was hailed by local media as an architectural triumph. As you might have guessed, however, outside designers felt there was something already quite familiar with the Cube Tube, and it wasn't as creative as its designers wanted everyone to believe. 4 years earlier, the new building for the Solferein Design School in Essen, Germany, had opened and had been designed to be a 114-foot cube, intended to be a statement building amongst unremarkable structures that were already there. The external walls featured seemingly random punctured windows to let the light in a suspiciously similar way to the building that later opened in China. When asked about this, the Chinese architects claimed they have never heard of that building, so couldn't have possibly copied the design, leaving the rest of the world to make up their minds for themselves. Number 1. Huaxi, the Copycat Village. Huaxi Village is often referred to as the richest town in China, where according to local statistics, every resident has more than $100,000 in their bank account and happily works 7 days a week. Founded in 1961, the residents all supposedly live in mansions, drive expensive European cars, and live by the philosophy that having money, a house, a car, and a family is the key to happiness. Each villager owns a stake in the village, so while it continues to succeed, they continue to get richer. The problem with expecting people to work so hard, however, is that with their newfound fortune, how are they expected to visit and learn about the rest of the world? The answer, the man who built the village realized, was to bring the rest of the world to the village, so the World Park was born. There you can see replicas of almost every famous monument on Earth, all within close proximity to each other. They have the Sydney Opera House, the Arc de Triomphe, the Statue of Liberty, the White House, and that's just the beginning. There's also part of a Great Wall of China, several other Chinese monuments, and even a replica of the U.S. Capitol building. The only problem with all of these is that it appears as if the designers behind them forgot to look at what they were recreating. In many ways, the fake facades of the World Park sum up the town of Huaxi, where while claiming to offer the residents freedom and prosperity, actually takes all of this away if they ever leave, and relies on migrant workers to sustain the productivity of the factories without giving them a fair wage or share of the village's success. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.